The moment I knew I was being systematically erased was not when they moved my reserved parking spot to the back of the gravel lot near the dumpsters, forcing me to walk through the muddy puddles in the dark. It was not when my name quietly disappeared from the internal company directory, without a word of explanation or a courtesy call from human resources. No, it was at 6:15 in the morning on a chilly, overcast Tuesday when I walked into my corner office on the 14th floor. The exact same time I had arrived every single day for 20 years and found a 27-year-old woman sitting behind my executive desk. She had her designer boots propped up on my mahogany chair, casually scrolling through my personal computer files as if she owned them. She looked up, popped her strawberry chewing gum, and did not even blink. She told me that this was the innovation lab now and that they were pivoting the space for a more dynamic and collaborative team environment. Her name was Khloe Vance, the niece of our chief executive officer, Walter Vance. She possessed a Stanford Master of Business Administration, zero real-world financial experience, 200,000 followers on LinkedIn, where she posted about disrupting corporate finance, and apparently, she was my replacement. My name is Gerald Foster. I am 52 years old, a retired Navy veteran, and I have spent 20 years at this investment firm, Summit Asset Management. We manage $4.2 billion in assets, or at least we did before things went sideways. When I asked Khloe where my personal belongings were, she gestured vaguely toward the doorway and said, facilities had moved them to the basement archive room because they needed the executive floor space for creative collaboration, brainstorming sessions, and agile team meetings. I stood there and stared at her, noticing she had already completely redecorated my space. My framed professional certifications, which had taken me years of study and experience to earn, and the photograph of my Navy unit in Bahrain, standing together in front of our helicopter hangar under the desert sun, were gone. The client appreciation plaques were gone, replaced by motivational posters about disruption, agility, and a flashing LED light that said hustle mode. I did not argue. I turned and walked to the elevator, maintaining the same discipline and emotional control I had learned during my years of military service in the Persian Gulf. 10 minutes later, I found my boxes in the basement archive room under flickering green fluorescent lights and on cold, damp concrete floors. My files were stacked haphazardly against a dusty brick wall near an old furnace. My Navy shadow box, the one containing my service ribbons, unit patch, and bronze star, was sitting in the trash bin outside the building, resting on top of empty coffee cups and greasy pizza boxes. It was a custom-made walnut box that my crew had given me when I retired, representing decades of sacrifice, long deployments, and friends who never made it back. Seeing it treated like yesterday's garbage made something cold lock into place in chest. I picked it up, carefully wiped off the dust with my handkerchief, and carried it back inside. That was the exact moment I stopped being angry and started getting precise. You have to understand how I ended up in that basement. Last April, 7 months ago, Walter had a situation. Some compromising photographs from a business conference in Miami were leaked to the press along with questionable expense reports showing personal use of company funds. The board of directors panicked. They needed someone clean, someone the clients trusted implicitly, to hold things steady while the lawyers handled the mess. They made me the acting chief financial officer in an emergency vote. The merger with an overseas asset management firm had just been announced in March, and they needed to keep regulators happy. My title was upgraded, my signature authority expanded, and I was listed as the primary officer on all regulatory filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. They told me it was temporary, just until things settled down. Then in May, Walter brought in Khloe. He said we needed to streamline our digital presence and speak to millennial investors. She was supposed to handle marketing and social media, which lasted about 2 weeks. By June, she was sitting in partner meetings. By August, she had a corporate title that had never existed before, Chief Innovation Officer. By October, she had my office, and I was in the basement with boxes of compliance files. But nobody had officially changed my title, and nobody had revoked my acting chief financial officer designation. They just moved me, quietly displacing me like furniture they no longer wanted. My basement office was a folding table, a metal chair, and a corner of the archive room that smelled of old paper and damp concrete. My computer monitor sat on a cardboard box because they had not even bothered to bring down a proper desk. I set up my laptop and started going through the files. 20 years of documentation, all backed up and organized exactly the way the military taught me. In the service, you learn that when someone is trying to push you out, you do not fight back immediately. You observe, you document, and you wait for them to make the mistake they do not know they are making. I knew Khloe would make mistakes, and she already was. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I went upstairs to Walter's office. His assistant waved me in without looking up from her phone. Walter was at his desk typing on his laptop, wearing a designer hoodie that probably cost $500. He had started dressing like a technology founder lately, claiming it made him more approachable to our younger clients. He thanked me for being flexible about the office situation, not even looking up from his screen. When I asked him what flexible meant, he said Khloe needed space for her innovation initiatives, and that, at this stage in my career, I was more valuable as institutional memory than active leadership. He suggested an advisory or consulting role in the future. Institutional memory is just a polite term for someone you are trying to phase out without actually firing them. I asked about the acting chief financial officer designation. Walter waved his hand dismissively and said they would figure that out after the merger closed. He told me that right now they needed energy, which Khloe brought, while I brought stability, calling them different skill sets. He said the legal department would clean up the filings later and told me not to worry about it. But I was worrying because Walter clearly was not. I walked out of his office, went back to my basement corner, opened a new document on my laptop, and started a file titled Timeline and Documentation. The first entry was May, noting Khloe Vance was hired with no securities license, no regulatory registration, and no approval. I backed it up to 3 different drives and returned to work. Khloe's first major presentation happened 2 weeks after she took my office. She called it an all-hands meeting with mandatory attendance. I sat in the back of the conference room watching her set up. She had a laptop covered in startup stickers and enough confidence to fill a stadium. The lights dimmed, and her presentation appeared on the screen, titled Dynamic Capital Flux Framework, an Artificial Intelligence Risk Assessment System. I almost choked on my coffee. She clicked to the first slide and announced that traditional risk models were dead, claiming she had developed something revolutionary. The next slide showed a flowchart that was actually my flowchart. It was the liquidity crisis protocol I had built in 2008, when Lehman Brothers collapsed. And everyone was panicking, the same system that had saved our clients millions. She had taken my 47-page operational manual, copied the key diagrams, slapped them into 6 slides with different colors, and added buzzwords like predictive analytics and machine learning integration. She called it generational intuition combined with algorithmic forecasting. One of the partners, Roger, leaned forward and called it brilliant, asking why we had not thought of this before. We did, in 2008, when I built it, and Roger knew that. He had been there, but nobody said anything. They just nodded and took notes while Khloe explained my own system back to me with worse terminology. After the meeting, I went to my basement corner and added another entry to my file, noting Khloe Vance presented my proprietary risk model from 2008 without attribution. I attached screenshots of her presentation next to my original documentation, saved it, and backed it up. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece about her 3 days later, calling her a rising star. I printed it and added it to the folder. Then the really foolish decisions started. Khloe decided we needed to modernize our portfolio strategy with decentralized finance and cryptocurrency wealth pools. She pitched it in a partner meeting. Liam Palmer, a 28-year-old junior analyst with an economics degree from Michigan who had been with us for 3 years and whom I had mentored, found me in the basement looking worried. He told me Khloe wanted to convert client portfolios into cryptocurrency assets, moving $200 million into decentralized protocols. When I asked if she had run it by legal, Liam said she claimed legal departments are why innovation dies. I closed my laptop and told Liam to start documenting these meetings, keeping notes of dates, times, and participants. I told him Khloe was building a house of cards, and Walter was too busy trying to look modern to notice. The cryptocurrency pitch did not go through, only because a partner asked how we would explain digital asset volatility to our 68-year-old clients, which made the other partners laugh. Walter still backed her up, saying we needed to think bigger. Next came the virtual reality conference room. Khloe convinced Walter to spend $200,000 on a virtual reality client engagement space, posting a video tour on LinkedIn that got 50,000 views and 3,000 likes. The conference room sat empty for 3 months because our clients preferred actual rooms where they could see actual people managing their actual money. Khloe's virtual reality conference room was a massive waste of capital, but Walter protected her from any criticism. The partners who actually generated our revenue were forced to smile and nod during her updates, even though we all knew the firm was bleeding cash to fund her vanity projects. I spent my days in the basement, analyzing our compliance systems and writing down every single irregularity. Liam Palmer began feeding me notes from their weekly marketing meetings. In these meetings, Khloe would throw out terms like blockchain synergy and predictive capital modeling, but whenever Liam asked for the mathematical formulas or risk assessments backing these concepts, she would dismiss him as a legacy thinker who did not understand the velocity of the modern market. I logged every warning Liam raised, creating a second file dedicated entirely to Khloe's operational mismanagement. The worst part was not the wasted money or the foolish ideas. It was what Khloe began doing in July, about 2 months after she started. She began signing official documents, including contracts, transfer authorizations, and trading permissions, all with her signature, her title, and her authority. I first noticed it when I was reviewing routine compliance reports in August. I saw her signature on a client authorization form, then another, and eventually a dozen more. By September, she was signing everything that came across her desk, including asset transfers, portfolio rebalancing approvals, and vendor contracts. I pulled one up on my screen, staring at her signature on the line that said Authorized Officer. Except she was not an authorized officer, not according to the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, not according to the Securities and Exchange Commission. To sign trading authorizations or approve client portfolio relocations, an individual must be a registered principal. This requires passing the Series 24 General Securities Principles Examination, registering with FINRA, and undergoing a 90-day vetting process. Khloe had none of these credentials. She was simply an employee with a Chief Innovation Officer title that carried zero regulatory weight. By signing these documents, she was committing securities fraud and exposing our entire firm to massive legal liabilities under federal law. Every trade she approved, every contract she authorized, and every client agreement she signed was legally invalid and could be voided at any moment by our clients or the regulatory authorities. I called Brandon Kowalski, who had served with me in the Navy during our deployment in the Persian Gulf. Brandon was now working in enforcement at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he knew securities law inside and out. I asked him a hypothetical question about what happens if an unregistered individual signs trading authorizations. Brandon was quiet for a long moment before asking how many documents were involved. I told him it was about 30 or 40 documents over 4 months. Brandon did not hesitate, stating that was not a hypothetical issue, but rather direct regulatory fraud. He explained that if the regulators discovered this during an active merger, the penalties would be catastrophic, potentially shutting down the firm. Brandon explained that the Securities and Exchange Commission took a severe view of unauthorized trading approvals. He told me that under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, any individual who executes or approves transactions without the proper licensing can be prosecuted for civil fraud, and the firm itself can face immediate suspension of its broker-dealer registration. Furthermore, during a merger, the acquiring firm must certify that all transactions and agreements have been approved by authorized officers. If they proceed with the transaction based on invalid signatures, they could face shareholder lawsuits and regulatory audits. Brandon warned me that if I did not report this, my name as acting chief financial officer on the filings would make me the primary target of the investigation. I thanked him for his advice, knowing exactly what my next move had to be. I went back to my basement office, opened my spreadsheet, and started a new section titled Unauthorized Signatures. I systematically went through every compliance report from July to October, pulling up every single document Khloe had signed. I cross-referenced each transaction with our internal database and the regulatory registries. It took me 3 days of meticulous research, but I compiled a comprehensive list. I counted 32 separate documents signed by Khloe Vance. Each document represented a distinct violation of regulatory rules, totaling over 50 separate violations. I took screenshots of every signature, compiled them into a single secure file, and backed it up on 3 different encrypted drives. I also discovered that Walter was actively hiding these violations. I spoke to our junior compliance officer, Peter Harris, whose desk was tucked away in a corner of the 5th floor. Peter looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot from weeks of reviewing merger checklists. I showed him the printouts of Khloe's signatures and asked if she had been registered as an authorized principal. Peter looked around nervously, lowered his voice to a whisper, and told me that he had flagged the issue to Walter back in August. According to Peter, Walter had practically yelled at him, telling him that the merger was the priority and that we could not afford to let minor regulatory formalities slow down our momentum. Walter had instructed Peter to ignore the signatures and file the compliance forms anyway. I could see the panic in Peter's eyes. He knew that if the regulators discovered this, he would be held personally liable for filing false compliance records, while Walter and Khloe would try to blame it on administrative oversight. This was a clear breach of fiduciary duty and a violation of internal controls. And it gave me another piece of evidence to document. The timing of this could not have been worse for Walter and Khloe, but it was perfect for me. Summit Asset Management was in the middle of a major $850 million merger with an overseas firm. The acquiring company was a highly conservative European asset manager, and they were performing intensive due diligence. Every contract, every client file, and every signature was being reviewed by their legal team and the Securities and Exchange Commission. My name was still listed on all the official filings as the acting chief financial officer and primary principal. If the regulators discovered these violations, they would look at me. I was not about to let Walter's niece destroy my professional reputation. I saved the files, locked my desk, and waited. When I called Eleanor, she did not even say hello, asking immediately what this pitch deck was. She said she had received a 40-page proposal from our new chief innovation officer about tokenized shareholder engagement and blockchain equity participation that made 0 sense. At the bottom of the document was an authorization to move forward with the implementation, already signed by Khloe Vance, Chief Innovation Officer, stating she was authorized to execute strategic portfolio modifications. Eleanor said that if this was real, she was pulling her money that very day. I asked her to send it to me immediately. The proposal arrived 30 seconds later. It was worse than I had imagined. Khloe had created a plan to convert Eleanor's company equity into blockchain-based tokens. Eleanor explained that Khloe had called her 3 times that week, using high-pressure sales tactics to convince her that tokenizing her company's assets was the only way to avoid being left behind in the digital age. Khloe had pitched it as a revolutionary way to raise capital without traditional underwriters. I analyzed the details of the proposal on my laptop. It was an absolute disaster. Under the Securities Act of 1933 and the established legal standards of the Howey test, Khloe's proposed tokens would be classified as unregistered securities. Offering them to the public would trigger immediate enforcement action from the Securities and Exchange Commission, resulting in massive fines, trading halts, and the potential destruction of Eleanor's oil enterprise. Khloe had signed the agreement on behalf of Summit Asset Management, committing the firm to an illegal transaction without any board approval or executive review. I stared at the signature and told Eleanor to give me 24 hours before she did anything. She agreed, warning me that she would withdraw her assets if the issue was not resolved. I sat in the basement, surrounded by boxes of old files under the flickering lights, and realized this was no longer about my office or my pride. This was about Khloe doing real damage to clients who trusted us. I opened my secure folder and went through everything I had collected over the past 5 months. I had the April board memo, appointing me acting chief financial officer, the filings listing me as the primary officer, the registration showing I was the sole authorized principal, and the 32 documents Khloe had signed without authority. It represented over 50 regulatory violations during an active merger review. I called Brandon again, asking what happens if someone signs unauthorized documents during a merger review that create liability for clients. Brandon said that was criminal territory, and I told him to be ready for when I lit the flare. I reviewed the legal precedents on my laptop, printing out relevant statutes to attach to my files. I focused on California Penal Code Section 470 regarding forgery and unauthorized execution of contracts, as well as the federal statutes governing investment advisors. I also compiled the documents showing that Khloe's planned restructuring was a direct violation of the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. I wanted to make sure that when Clara Hoffman received my email, she would see a complete, legally airtight case that left her with no room to negotiate or protect Walter and Khloe. I wanted to make it clear that the firm was facing immediate regulatory shutdown and criminal liability if they did not act. I double-checked the email address of the Securities and Exchange Commission liaison, making sure there were no typos. The trap was set, and it was completely inescapable. I also discovered a hidden folder on the shared network drive containing a confidential memo written by Khloe. The memo outlined a secret post-merger restructuring plan. To save money and show immediate profitability to the acquiring firm, Khloe was planning to terminate 10 compliance staff members in our department immediately, without the 60-day written notice required under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101. She planned to replace them with automated software she had developed through a shell company she owned, which would have been a massive conflict of interest and a direct violation of labor laws. I spent the next 4 hours writing an email to Clara Hoffman, our in-house legal counsel. Clara was a Harvard Law graduate with 15 years of securities experience, the kind of lawyer who feared regulatory violations above all else. The email was short and precise. The first paragraph reminded her that I was appointed acting chief financial officer in April, that the appointment was never formally revoked, and that I remained listed as the primary officer on all regulatory filings. The second paragraph noted that during the current merger review, all officer designations must be accurate, and all signatures must come from authorized principals. The third paragraph requested clarification on the current status of officer designations, specifically regarding any additional authorized principals added since April, and noted the planned violations of the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. Then I attached everything. I attached the April board memo, the filings showing my designation, the registration showing no other authorized principals, the 32 documents Khloe had signed, and the illegal layoff plans that violated the labor laws. I added one line at the bottom, requesting advice on the compliance status regarding unauthorized signatures during an active review. I saved it as a draft. It was 11 o'clock at night, and I went home, spent 2 hours in my garage workshop sanding a red oak bookshelf I was building, and then went to sleep. I scheduled the email to send at 4:47 in the morning, copying the Securities and Exchange Commission liaison and the merger compliance officer. I knew 3 people would have no choice but to act once they saw those attachments. My alarm went off at 6 o'clock in the morning. I woke up, fed my cat, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee, watching the steam rise in the quiet morning air. Checking my phone, I saw that the email had sent at exactly 4:47, and I had already received 3 delivery confirmations. Clara Hoffman had opened it at 5:53, the regulatory liaison at 6:02, and the merger compliance officer at 6:18. By 8:30, my phone was buzzing with a text from Liam, who said the executive floor was in total chaos and the partners had gathered in the main boardroom for an emergency meeting. I did not respond. I went to my garage, turned on the radio to a classic rock station, and worked on sanding the panels of my bookshelf. Around 10 o'clock, Brandon called to ask what I had done, explaining that the regulators had frozen all trading activity, pending verification of authorized principals, putting the merger on hold. He said the partners were losing their minds, and I told him my documentation was clean. Clara Hoffman called next, demanding I come to the office immediately. I took my time, driving slowly, letting the windshield wipers clear the light rain, and arriving around 11 o'clock. When I arrived, the executive floor was in complete disarray. Paper files were scattered across desks, and junior analysts were speaking in hushed, panicked tones, some even crying near the water cooler. I could hear shouting from the main boardroom, where the partners were arguing with the legal team representing the overseas acquiring firm. The merger lawyers were packing their briefcases, their faces grim. Dieter Schmidt, the lead compliance officer from the overseas firm, walked out of the boardroom, saw me, and shook my hand warmly, thanking me for my absolute professionalism and honesty. He then turned to Walter and announced that they were formally terminating the merger due to material breaches of representations and warranties regarding regulatory compliance. Liam found me in the hallway and whispered that Eleanor Barnes and another major client, Harvey Lancaster, had already pulled their accounts, representing over $1 billion walking out the door. The merger was completely dead. Clara pulled me into her office, looking genuinely terrified. She asked how long I had known about the unauthorized signatures, and I told her I had noticed irregularities in August. When she asked why I had not said anything sooner, I reminded her that I was in a basement archive room as institutional memory and expected the people paid to catch these things to do their jobs. She told me the regulators wanted a full audit, the merger was collapsing, and that I had destroyed the firm. I corrected her, stating Khloe had destroyed the firm and Walter had allowed it, while I had simply documented the truth. I pointed out that forging signatures on financial documents violated California Penal Code Section 470, and that Walter's instructions to the compliance staff constituted a direct breach of his fiduciary duty to the shareholders. Khloe was walked out by security that afternoon, carrying her belongings in a cardboard box, and Walter was forced to resign by the board 10 days later. The merger collapsed completely. The regulators opened an investigation, resulting in a 2-year industry ban for Khloe, a $75,000 personal fine, and the clawback of her $340,000 signing bonus. Walter retired in disgrace. After the merger collapsed, the board of directors realized that the firm could not survive as an independent entity. Summit Asset Management was forced to sell its remaining assets at a steep discount to a competitor, and our firm was completely dissolved. The partners who had ignored my work lost almost all of their equity and their reputations in the industry. Meanwhile, I was contacted by 3 firms within a week. I accepted a position as chief risk officer at a prestigious private equity firm, Pinnacle Capital Partners, which occupied the entire 30th floor of a modern skyscraper downtown. My new contract provided a base salary of $480,000 a year plus equity, which was 40% more than my previous salary. I brought Liam with me as my assistant director, and he is now learning how to do the work properly from someone who values competence. Pinnacle Capital Partners was a different world entirely. There were no designer hoodies, no flashing LED signs, and no unqualified relatives running key departments. It was a firm built on competence, diligence, and mutual respect. My new office had a massive cherry wood desk, leather chairs, and a window that overlooked the entire bay. When I walked down the hall, the partners greeted me by name, and my opinions on risk assessment were treated as the final authority. Liam Palmer flourished in this environment, quickly becoming one of our top risk analysts. The collapse of Summit Asset Management became a case study in the industry, a warning of what happens when a firm replaces operational competence with superficial branding and family nepotism. On weekends, I would sit in my quiet garage, working on my bookshelf, feeling the solid wood under my fingers, knowing that the things you build with care and integrity are the only ones that last. Hanging above it is my Navy shadow box, which I rescued from the trash. It reminds me of the phrase engraved at the bottom, meaning not for self, but for country. I was not trying to destroy the firm. I was protecting what we had built from people who thought buzzwords could replace decades of real experience. I poured a glass of scotch, held it to the light, and took a sip. It tasted like victory,